Red light spun across the ceiling of the Calyx Hollow as the alarm tore through my skull. My hands were shaking on the console. 60 seconds. That was all the time left before the alien battle fleet above Earth would either open fire or stand down, and the only thing standing between those two outcomes was me, a translator nobody had trained for this, sitting across from a creature who could end my planet with a single spoken command. Her name was Vex Ilarian Thren, 4 amber eyes, robes the color of dried blood, and right now, those eyes were locked on me, waiting for an answer to a question that made absolutely no sense, given what was about to happen to my species. "Explain human romance," she said. "Now. Before my fleet commander orders the strike." I stared at her. Somewhere above us, 7 warships hung in silent formation, weapons charged, waiting on her word. Down on Earth, 4 billion people had no idea how close they were to the end of everything, and this alien princess wanted to talk about love. "You want to talk about that right now?" "I want an honest answer," she said. "If your species can give me one truthful thing in the next 50 seconds, I will call off the strike. If you waste my time with nonsense, we proceed as scheduled." My mouth had gone completely dry. I had exactly one shot at this, and there was no version of me that had prepared for a pop quiz on love with a countdown attached. "Pair bonding," I said. "You already saw the data. We form them for 60 to 80 years. One partner, most of the time, sometimes for life." "I have the data," she snapped. "The data means nothing to me. I want the reason. Explain why an intelligent species would trap itself for 80 years with a single, deteriorating, unreliable creature, when logic dictates a rotating series of optimal partners would maximize genetic and social advantage. You have 40 seconds. I thought about my mother's hands shaking as she held my father's across their kitchen table, both of them getting older, neither of them pulling away. "Because logic isn't the point," I said. "We don't do it because it's smart. We do it because being known by one person, completely, for a whole lifetime, is worth more than being safe with 100 people who never really see you." Her head tilted, all 4 eyes fixed on me, in that unsettling asynchronous blink her species used when something didn't fit their models. "Elaborate," she said. 30 seconds. "My father has a disease," I said, the words falling out faster than I meant them to. "His hands shake. He's getting worse every year. My mother knows exactly what's coming. She could leave. Nobody would blame her. Instead, she holds his hand every single night at dinner like nothing has changed. That's not because it's efficient. It's because she decided a long time ago that she'd rather suffer next to him than be comfortable without him." Vex Ilarian did not answer immediately. The silence stretched so long I thought I had lost. Then, somewhere behind her, a soft chime sounded from her wrist device, a signal I later learned meant the countdown had been paused, not ended, only paused. "That is illogical," she said quietly. "There is no calculable return on that investment." "There isn't supposed to be one," I said. "That's the whole point of it." She rose from her seat, robes pooling around her like something poured rather than worn, and walked slowly to the viewport where Earth hung, blue and small, and utterly unaware of how close it had just come to disappearing. "On my world," she said without turning, "bonds are formed through contract. Compatibility is measured with a genetic algorithm before any 2 people are permitted to pair. If the numbers fall outside acceptable range, the bond is dissolved immediately, without exception, without grief. I am roughly 70 of your years old. I have had 4 such contracts in that time. I do not remember the names of 2 of them." I didn't know what to say to that, so for a moment I said nothing at all. "Your species," she continued, "chooses to bond with creatures whose value declines, whose bodies weaken, whose minds fade. You do this knowingly, in advance, with full information about the coming cost, and you call this love. My analysts flagged this as evidence of cognitive malfunction, a defect that should have been removed by evolution centuries ago. I came here today prepared to authorize a strike on the theory that any species irrational enough to breed this way was too unstable to negotiate with." The room felt smaller with every word. Somewhere behind the wall of glass, I could hear the low hum of the ship's systems recalculating something, a countdown resetting itself, waiting. "But you're not doing that anymore," I said. It wasn't quite a question. I am reconsidering, she said. That is not the same as deciding. She turned back to face me, and for the first time since she had walked into that room, her voice lost its clipped, official edge. Tell me about your grandmother, she said. I blinked. My grandmother? You mentioned her in the briefing file your government submitted. A woman who sat beside a dying man for 6 months, reading him a newspaper he could not hear. Explain that to me. Not as data, as truth. I felt my throat tighten. My grandfather had a stroke. The doctors told her there was almost no chance he could understand anything anymore. She went to his hospital room every single morning anyway, and she read him the newspaper from front to back, every headline, every weather report, every single day for 6 months. Why? Because there was a small chance he could hear her, I said, and because even if he couldn't, she decided she wasn't going to become the kind of person who stopped showing up just because it stopped making sense. Vexillarian's eyes did something I had not seen before, a slow, deliberate blink across all 4 at once, almost human in its weight. You are proposing, she said, that your species treats the risk itself as the valuable part of the bond, not despite the danger of loss, because of it. I guess when you put it that way, it does sound a little insane. It is insane, she said. It may also be the single most interesting thing I have learned about your species since I arrived in this system. The tension in the room had not fully lifted. I could still feel it in the way her hands rested near the small control unit clipped to her belt, the same device that could reach her fleet commander with one press. But something had shifted. The urgency in her voice had changed from a countdown to something closer to curiosity. And curiosity, I was beginning to understand, was rare currency with her people. Negotiations did not end that day. They stretched on for 6 more weeks, each session more careful than the last, both sides circling the same question from different angles, always searching for the one crack that would prove humanity was either worth an alliance or worth erasing. I sat in on most of those sessions as a translator, technically low-ranking, technically replaceable, and yet somehow the one person Vexillarian kept returning to whenever the formal talks broke for the day. She asked about wedding vows next. About why humans stood in front of crowds and promised things they could not actually guarantee. Sickness, poverty, old age, and meant it anyway. You are making a promise you cannot enforce, she said one evening, pacing the length of the observation deck, while the stars burned steady and cold outside. There is no penalty clause. No consequence. If the promise is broken beyond social embarrassment, why would any rational being agree to such an empty contract? Because the promise isn't the point, I told her. The point is that you're telling someone, out loud, in front of everyone who matters to you, that you choose them anyway. Not because you're forced to, because you want to. Wanting is not binding. No, I said, but it's real. And it's harder to keep a promise nobody can force you to keep. That's what makes it mean something. She asked about grief after that, about why humans wrote songs for people who had left them, why we returned again and again to old letters, old photographs, old places, instead of simply updating our expectations and moving forward the way her people did after a contract dissolved. I told her about a friend of mine, a man named Daniel, who had lost his wife 3 years earlier, and still kept her coat by the front door, because taking it down felt like admitting she was never coming back. Vexillarian listened to that story without interrupting once, which I had learned by then was as close as her species came to genuine astonishment. That behavior serves no function, she said finally. The coat cannot bring comfort. It cannot restore the lost partner. By every measure available to me, it is waste. Maybe, I said, or maybe it's proof that love doesn't disappear just because the person does. Keeping the coat is his way of saying she still matters, even now, even like this. Once, during a break in formal talks, she asked me the strangest question of all, whether the human custom of growing old together was some kind of shared agreement to decline in unison, since neither partner gained any measurable advantage from remaining once the other's usefulness had faded. I told her that was exactly backwards, that the usefulness was never the point. That 2 people who had spent 40 years together weren't measuring each other's value anymore. They were simply choosing, every single day, to keep being the person the other one had built a whole life around. She didn't answer that time either. She only looked at me, long and steady, and something behind those 4 unblinking eyes had softened in a way I had not expected from a creature who arrived in our solar system, ready to authorize our destruction. On what turned out to be the final day of negotiations, word came down that her people had agreed to a full diplomatic exchange instead of the military occupation her fleet had originally been authorized for. The relief in that room was immediate and enormous, the kind of relief that makes your knees weak once you finally let yourself feel it. But Vexillarian did not celebrate. She simply sought me out, alone, on the same observation deck where all of this had started. "I have revised my full assessment of your species," she said. "Is that good?" "It is a recalibration," she said. "I arrived expecting to find a design flaw, an instinct your species had failed to remove through natural selection, similar to an appendix, or a tendency toward unnecessary conflict. Instead, you described to me the single most inefficient, most reckless, most consequential choice a thinking being can make, and you told me your entire species makes that choice constantly, deliberately, with full knowledge of the coming cost." "That's about right," I said. "That is either the greatest weakness I have ever observed in a species," she said, "or its greatest strength. I do not yet know which. History suggests it is rarely the former." 3 days later, her shuttle prepared to depart for the long journey home, back to a high court that would spend years debating what humanity actually was and what to do about it. I stood on the docking platform to see her off, along with a small group of officials who had spent the last 6 weeks negotiating terms none of us fully understood yet. Before she boarded, she turned back once, robes catching the strange gravity of the loading bay, and said the only thing she told me that entire trip that sounded less like a report and more like a person speaking from somewhere underneath all that armor and protocol. "I hope someday someone chooses me the way your grandmother chose your grandfather," she said. "Not because it is efficient, because it is worth it." Then the doors closed, and the shuttle lifted, and I stood there on that platform long after the light of her engines had faded into the dark, thinking about how close we had come to losing everything over a single question neither side had expected to matter. The official reports called that day a turning point in interspecies relations. The historians would later write about treaty language and trade agreements, and the careful diplomacy that followed. None of that felt true to what actually happened in that room. What actually happened was simpler and stranger than any of it. An alien princess arrived above our planet with the authority to end us, expecting to find a flaw. Instead, she found the one thing her own people had engineered out of themselves generations ago: the willingness to risk everything on someone else, without any guarantee it would be worth it. In the months that followed, as the first joint stations were built and the first true exchanges of knowledge began, I kept thinking about that final countdown, the 50 seconds that had decided everything, and how strange it was that the thing which saved us was not our weapons or our technology or our carefully worded treaties. It was the fact that somewhere on Earth, an old woman still read the newspaper to a man who could no longer hear her, and a shaking hand still reached across a kitchen table every single night without fail. Vexillarian returned twice more over the following 2 years, each visit shorter than the last, each one focused less on formal negotiation and more on something closer to genuine curiosity. She asked about children once, about why parents continued loving them even after they grew difficult, distant, sometimes cruel in the careless way only the young can be. She asked about forgiveness, about why 2 people who had hurt each other badly would choose to stay rather than simply part ways and start again with someone new. Each answer I gave her seemed to peel back another layer of whatever assumption her people had built their entire society around: that love was inefficient, that risk was weakness, that permanence without guarantee was simply poor design. And each time, instead of rejecting what I told her, she carried it back to her people, one careful piece at a time, like someone slowly proving a theory she had spent her whole life certain was false. On her final visit, she told me something I had not expected. Her own people had begun, quietly and without much fanfare, experimenting with something closer to what we called marriage. Not a genetic contract with an exit clause built in from the start, but a real choice, made without any guarantee of return, simply because 2 people decided the other was worth staying for. "It is not common yet," she said. Many of my people still consider it reckless, but a small number have chosen it anyway. How's it going for them? Unmeasurable, she said, and for the first time since I had known her, something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed her face. Which I have come to understand is rather the point. I never saw her again after that visit, though occasional reports still reached us through the diplomatic channel, news of slow but steady change happening light years away, all traced back to one conversation that had started with a countdown and a question nobody expected to matter as much as it did. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close we came to losing everything, simply because we could not have explained ourselves quickly enough. And I think about how the thing that saved us was not proof of our strength, or our intelligence, or our usefulness. It was proof of something far stranger and far more human, the simple, illogical, reckless decision to love someone anyway, fully knowing what it might cost, and choosing it every single time regardless. That, more than any treaty or trade agreement, is what convinced an alien princess that humanity was worth knowing. Not our power, not our potential, just the quiet, unremarkable, endlessly repeated choice to stay.